Clearly, Aitape was no place for me to stay. It was hot. The district officer could make it bad for me if he wanted to, for there was plenty of evidence that I had gone hunting the illicit plume. The law was, to some extent, sensitive to the pressure of the New Guineans. If the Garmat told them I had been in Dutch territory, if the Dutch officials wanted me prosecuted so as to make an example, I was vulnerable. I sought out Captain Bowen, and he agreed to take me back to Salamaua. That was a bigger and livelier port, the gateway to the gold fields, the hotter recruiting activity. You could gamble in that port, meet the sports, the miners, the adventurers, the handicappers, the English leave your country for country's gold, boys. Leave your country for country's good, boys. It was when I arrived in Salamaua, a little older, a little more thoughtful, that I developed my first doubts about New Guinea as a place to stay and wind up. Someday, I had to get out of here as soon as I struck it rich. I took a look at where I was and how I was living, roaming from spot to spot, with these primitives all about, looking for gold, bumping and bungling about like a blind bumblebee, hoping for a chance, plunging at a jungle with bare hands. I said to myself, something is wrong. I lived on the outskirts in a bamboo leaf-covered lodging with no more than a dog or a cat for company. I had a servant to cook whatever I had shot during the daytime. From here, I went out on the water in the Matupi, or went with bands of Kanakas inland on recruiting trips. Most of the money was in recruiting. You could sell a few New Guineans for 20 to 30 pounds apiece to a copra plantation. Always, wherever I was, nightfall meant books and a chance to try to connect with the ideas of the world, for I sensed how far a cry all this was from the schoolboy life I had been leading only shortly before. The boys I went to school with were probably still doing their lessons. Now, out of school, an inner need for learning sprang up in me. I felt ignorant and uneducated. Though I had read whenever I had the chance, now I made the chance. I plunged into reading as if it were my most vital need, and, after money, it was. Father, now in Sydney, sent me reading matter, magazines, papers, books. It took 2 weeks for books to reach where I was. When a case of books arrived, it was the biggest thing of all for me. I fondled these books as if I were running my hands through a lovely woman's hair. I waded through Russian novelists, Greek philosophers, French writers. I had to read by the light of a hurricane lamp. For a time, I had one fine lamp called a Coleman. When I was reading, it attracted every goddamn bug in the jungle, and the jungle animals, too. As I read, I had to contend with the bugs, the lizards in the ceiling, and keep an eye out for big crab-like spiders, bigger than tarantulas. They spin webs of fishing line thickness and catch birds. I wasn't alone, except physically. You couldn't be quite alone with Balzac or de Maupassant, even Robert Louis Stevenson, drumming around in your skull. You couldn't be lonely with the poems of the English school, nor with the beauty of style that the faggot Baudelaire or the other French writer Rostand. Rostand had the greatest influence on me. I liked his style. I liked his story of Napoleon II, his Les Longs. I was able to read him with difficulty in French. I had a dictionary at my side, and that helped. I was able to grasp the man's romance and poetry. Now I was stirred by the whole world of the outside, the world of the West, Europe, America. There was a world of culture and excitement up there, but inaccessible except through print. Whenever I read a footnote that quoted a writer of some other book as having said something interesting, I made a note of his name and the title. I prepared a list of books to order from the Sydney Public Library. Victor Hugo, H.G. Wells' Outline of History, and the Greeks, Plato, Aristotle. Sometimes it was hard going. I skipped, muddled, and waited. Sometimes I swam well into these works. Here I am, I said to myself, lost in the jungle. There they are, the primitives. In my hut are these masters of Western style and thought. Is this my chance? I have to make it. I have to find out why I am here in New Guinea, and where I ought to be, and who I ought to be. I think now that the only gold I found in New Guinea was in these books, read at night by hurricane lamp, in kampongs, in bamboo huts, wherever I put up. When I rafted, rowed, sailed, there were books close by. At night, when the day's contending with my Kanakas was over, and the day's wrangling with my colleagues in gold exploration or copra growing, I tried to get the things I never could discipline myself to absorb in the classroom. I felt a growth of power, a kind of certainty. I'd be able to talk of these men and their works if and when I met people who read them. I adopted the speech and the manners of the characters I read about, borrowing what seemed useful for purposes of helping myself to grow up. One morning when I woke, I noticed that I had a thick red chin stubble. I hadn't shaved in days. I looked at myself in the mirror. No good, I said to myself. Shave every day, even if there is no one around to see you, even if only the lizard looks down from the branch of any old tree. If I earned enough money recruiting, I could take another crack at the gold field itself. So I repeated forays into the interior country. Once I was with a party of 7 boys about 3 days' march inland. My carriers, going down to these precipitous gorges, moved in a narrow, snaky file. There were 2 boys in the lead with machetes. My other Kanakas, armed with guns, brought up the rear. I was in the middle with my current monkey, a little boy named Ateliwa. He had been with me for months, hanging about my quarters at Salamaua, attending my wants, always smiling, ready to do any bidding. The exasperating part, as you slogged, was that overhead from time to time you saw a huge Junkers plane go by. It made the jump from the coast to an aerodrome right at the center of the goldfield. A little settlement called Wow had sprung up there a year or 2 earlier. An enterprising government man named C.J. Levian had hit on the idea of carrying in specially put together dredges, freighting the parts in by air a couple of tons at a time. A couple of big companies, English and American backed, were formed, and they went in for deep mining and alluvial mining. The knowledge that the planes did this 1 week trip in about a half hour made me curse them. My boys wondered why I swore. Also, as I tracked, I lived in dread of getting Japanese river fever from a certain bush tick. I was tiring. I felt malarial, knees weak, head dizzy. Without a word of warning, spears streamed our way. Ambush! Ateliwa got one right through his belly, and it came out low down his back. He writhed to the ground. I jumped behind a tree with my revolver in my hand. All my other boys, instead of staying there and firing, threw their packs away and ran down the red clay mountainside. I fired as soon as I could and hit one of the raiders right in the neck. He dropped, squealing like a pig. I fired twice more, and that was the end of that. I didn't even feel the poisoned arrow in my foot, the mark of which I still carry. As soon as I got over the shock, I grabbed my knapsack from the dead Altaliwa and hobbled after my boys as fast as I could. They were sitting down in the next clearing, having gone as far as they could run after they had thrown their packs away. Then I learned that one of the other boys had got a spear in the neck and he was gone. That left 6 of us. It was dusk, and I could hear the garmuts. You could hear voices on all sides talking, and they sounded ominous. It started to rain, with an equatorial madness. We had nothing to eat, not a thing. We were high up and cold. My foot hurt, and I feared infection. My malaria was working in me hard. I was freezing and sweating at the same time. Throughout the night, the garamuts dinned in our ears. The crocodile skin tom-toms kept going, sometimes loud, sometimes seeming to beat softer, as if the tribesmen were trying to make up their minds whether to come and get us. They were letting all New Guinea know that the white invader had shot and killed again. I stayed awake. I had time to think and listen, and to feel fear. Mostly it was the anticipation of what might happen. I could picture myself with spears through me, impaled, de-gutted, as I had seen others in New Guinea. I decided that the raiders had looted the abandoned packs, and maybe that satisfied them. Maybe the firearms scared them. Whatever, their garamuts died down and they didn't return. Shivering and shaking, I passed my most terrifying night in New Guinea. In the morning, the drum sounds ceased. We struggled down, falling, sliding, cursing, sweating to the New Guinea coast. At Salamaua, I was arrested and charged with murder. The word of my fracas with the tribesmen had come back to the coast by Garamut, and as my boys and I walked into the village, a government man named Hawthorne, who hated my guts, approached and said I had to go with him. I told him I had been raided without warning and had to defend myself. Behind Hawthorne was the pressure of the missionary folk of certain denominations working hard at this part of the coast. The missionaries wanted me nailed up, anything to show the natives that they were the right guys, and Hawthorne wanted to impress this group because they had political pull, whereas bums and adventurers like myself, who came and went, had nothing but our nerve. Owing to the fact that a rough Clement had come here for the gold hunt, they had built a small jailhouse. Owing to the fact that a rough element had come here for the gold hunt, they had built a small jailhouse. From time to time, it held a drunken or two adventurous customer. I was now in this clink, without bail. Salamaua was surrounded by swamp, and the smell oozed into my quarters and stayed. The word reached the goldfields at once. The news spread elsewhere. A few friends called to see me. Local physician, Dr. Giblin, and his wife consoled me and offered to do whatever they could. The best visitor was my old friend from the goldfield, Jack Ryan. He had come to New Guinea when he was a younger man, about 17 or 18, like myself. Now he was in his late 40s. He had brains, a commodity that man would be better off not having in New Guinea, but he hadn't made it. Every time a fortune seemed in his grasp, it skipped him. I think I reminded him of myself. I think I reminded him of himself when he, as an adventurous lad, had first come here. "What happened?" he asked, staring through an interstice of bamboo poles. I told him, adding that Hawthorne, the man who was pressing the charge against me, hated my type, with some reason. He had accused me earlier of being pretty young to be a recruiter, aren't you? I told Jack I intended to defend myself. Murder? Want to be jailed for 30 years? I know what happened out there was better than any lawyer. That's not enough. You've got to have some legal tricks to get out of a serious jam like this. Say the word and I'll send to Sydney for the right talent. God, no. Thanks, Jack, but I'll do it myself. Then I'll be your witness. What did you witness? Natives, bush Kanakas, for 25 years, and I can lie under oath better than any weedy runt you ever met. Words I was to remember. I read all the law books I could get my hands on. I studied what Anglo-Australian jurisprudence had to say about the subject. I pictured myself in the role of barrister. I carefully avoided writing to my parents about the fix I was in, and I nearly destroyed myself. The Solomowans came out to attend the trial of the young Australian. Prospectors, recruiters, bums, whores, as well as the missionary element crowded the court. It wasn't a big courtroom, and the crowd more than filled the 10 rows of seats made of the trunks of coconut trees. The district magistrate sat on the platform elevated about a foot above the rest of the room. There was a dock, a witness chair, a table for the prosecutor, and a table for the defender. Since I was my own defender, I sat in the seat that counsel ordinarily would occupy. The prospector painted a picture of me as a typical, wild, careless prospector. I was unconcerned for the natives, antagonizing them, making it difficult to build goodwill between the Australian administration and the New Guineans. Common sense required that a depredator like myself should be punished, show the natives that the government did not condone mistreatment of the local inhabitants, show them we believed in fair play, harmonious relations, and we were here for the good as well as our own. Put Flynn away for the rest of his life, right here in the Morobe district, where the natives would see how the white rulers punished one of their own who fired at their people with impunity. I made a brief opening address in which I declared that I had acted in self-defense. The business of recruiting was necessary to the flourishing of Australian interests in the mandated territory. I contended. The goldfields needed labor. I was one of an army of men vital to the needs of the exploitation of New Guinea. I said that one of the problems of the Australian administration and of Western civilization itself was to lift the natives to the level of civilized living. This was an acknowledged headhunting country and an advance to a labor relationship that would ultimately be helpful to the Malaysians themselves. It wasn't easy. Nobody else had found this process easy. I had never killed anyone in my life, and I had not done so intentionally this time. I closed by saying I had defended my life out there in the jungle and would do it here in court.